I huffed exasperatedly to myself, for perhaps the millionth time, ever since that asshole locked me up in one of the conference rooms of the higher levels of the secret HQ, with those two grunts from the cell block. I swore that they still held a grudge against me after I locked them up in my old cell. The mere memory brought a brief smile to my face, but it was quickly wiped off when my thoughts traced back to Shadow. I couldn't believe that sly bastard managed to take control of Secret HQ. All throughout Secret Basic, we trainees were constantly told that the Secret HQ was the most protected place in the whole world. How in the hell did the Phantom successfully take it, as if it were a candy bar freely laying around, just waiting for a kid to pick it up? I let out a dramatic sigh, which caused a twitch from one of my guards. I smirked, as if my simple action irritated the man. If I was going to be held against my will, then I may as well have attempted to have at least some fun with it. At the expense of my captors, of course. A fierce rumbling came out of nowhere. The room shook violently, and some of the windows shattered. I instinctively took cover under the long and elegant wooden table, and waited until the rumbling stopped. My guards were surprised as well, which led me to believe that there was a resistance. Hopefully, it's the Seekers fighting back, I thought. The rumbling stopped quickly, however. From what I could see, the damage was extensive. As I stood from my hiding place, I cautiously walked towards the cool breeze that freely came in from the broken windows, and looked down. I immediately regretted my decision, for it was then I realized just how high we were. Oh God, I thought. I hope those brutes don't push me out. For my safety, I stepped away from the exposed area and casually sat on a conference table. The two Phantom agents' initial confusion was replaced with their usual stoic expressions. A thought came into mind, and I smiled at the implication. I stuck 2 fingers in my mouth and stretched the skin so that it looked like the Cheshire Cat. Of course, they ignored me. However, I was persistent. I stuck my tongue out and rolled my eyeballs inward. One of the agents shivered slightly at the sight, which caused me to smirk in return. The door then opened, which ended my childish scheme, and at the doorway stood no other than the Phantom leader himself.
Hello, Agent Moore. A pleasure to see you again.
I snorted. Whatever, just skip the pleasantries, I replied. The Phantom leader chuckled in response. Instead of entering the room, he stood outside and gestured to the 2 guards.
Bring her out,
he said. As obedient as ever, the 2 brutes approached me and attempted to grab my arms. I felt like a child who had to be guarded by adults because I couldn't find my way around. I crossed my arms and looked at them in defiance. Unsure, they looked over to the Phantom leader, who merely chuckled at my reaction.
Leave her.
He replied.
I don't think our guest will be any trouble whatsoever. Will she?
That depends on you, I answered as I leaned back.
No,
Shadow then said as he peeked from behind.
it depends on this.
He then took out a serrated shotgun and pointed at me. He looked at me in the eye, and then gestured towards the door. I merely blinked as I looked at the side of the shotgun, before I glanced at the agent, who looked pissed. I still couldn't get over the fact of how he looked exactly like John, aside from the long scar that went over his nose. You're a self-absorbed bastard, you know that? Shadow's upset demeanor switched 180 as he grinned.
Why, thank you. I'll take that as a compliment.
I rolled my eyes. Not wanting to have a new hole put in me, I walked towards the door and was followed by the 4 men. We walked down the gray hallway until we reached the elevators. Shadow stepped in front of me and pressed the call button. A minute later, the elevator opened and we all stepped inside. The ride down was awkward for me. It wasn't every day where one was in a confined space with their worst enemy without some type of violence occurring. I breathed in deeply to calm my increasing nerves.
So, Agent Moore,
Shadow casually started.
have you finally accepted to join us?
I looked at the man in annoyance. Hell no. I'd rather die for what I believe in than live a life without meaning. Your organization is a disease that needs to be purged, I said defiantly as I placed my hands on my hips. Shadow merely raised an eyebrow at my behavior.
How poetic.
He replied, mockingly. Just as I was about to reply, the elevator door then opened and revealed a chaotic sight. I quietly gasped at all the number of the bodies, both belonging to the Seekers and the Phantoms, which were all over the place. Shadow coughed, which snapped me out of my distraction.
Ladies first.
He said almost politely, while he kicked me forward. I stumbled a bit, but once I regained my balance, I glared at the Phantom Agent in indignation. He ignored my look and proceeded to walk forward. The Phantom Leader chuckled. That smug bastard.
Be polite, Shadow. This is no way to treat a guest.
More like a prisoner, I thought bitterly. The two guards pushed me again, and I directed my glare to them. I grumbled in my breath, but followed Shadow and his father nonetheless. We made our way towards the center of the lobby, when the Phantom Leader stopped and turned his face to his guards.
Put her in the van. We'll then recall high-ranked agents and head off to Site B. We've got some work to do.
I rose an eyebrow at him. You're saying all of this in front of me? The man looked back at me.
Are you aware of where Site B is? Or what it is?
I blinked in response, while the bastards laughed briefly.
So naive.
He commented. I glared at him. Suddenly, a loud pang erupted, as a great flash of light appeared which momentarily blinded us. To add to that, numerous smoke grenades were released all around us. I coughed as I inhaled some of the substance. Once my eyesight recovered from the initial flashbang, I saw the form of Shadow leaning against a wall that provided him some cover from the exposed area.
Oh, great.
I heard him mutter to himself. I then heard multiple footsteps rapidly make their way over to our general direction. I took cautious steps forward until I was out of the density of the smoke. One figure in the middle aimed a gun at me.
Stay where you are!
The voice said. The figure then came into view as I recognized the voice. I felt my heart flutter. John? I asked, unsure. The man turned his head towards me, and his eyes widened.
Rachel?
He asked hoarsely. I smiled widely. In that moment, a deep connection passed through us. Relief, joy, love, but also anxiety. I wanted to approach him, but then the sound of a gun cocking caused my face to pale dramatically.
No one moves, or I pump this chick full of lead.
Shadow warned, as he stepped out from his cover and aimed his vicious shotgun at me. John turned to face my attacker, and his eyes darkened immensely.
You!
He said, venomously. Shadow calmly walked over towards me.
Indeed.
He replied.
It seems that life can't keep us apart. And what do you know? It's like a big happy family reunion.
John's eyes widened slightly, but then narrowed once more.
The old bastard is here?
Now. Is that the proper way to address your father?
Came the calm reply. The Phantom Leader's glowing eyes were the first thing I saw as he stepped out from the cloud of smoke. It was disturbing how identical they were. Apparently, the other secret agents felt the same way as I did, for their eyes widened, and some of them tensed up. John, on the other hand, remained outwardly cool.
What do you want?
He asked plainly. The Phantom Leader stepped forward until he was beside me.
I can't check up on my one and only son?
He asked almost sincerely.
It's been almost 8 years since I've last seen you. I've missed you very much.
John raised an eyebrow.
I'm surprised you can feel anything other than lust for power. You were never big in the emotion department.
His father hummed.
No, I suppose it wasn't.
He replied honestly.
However, I do have priorities. You, my son, are number one on my list.
John's face scrunched in disgust.
Like hell I'll work for you. I refuse to become a monster like you.
A look of disappointment passed through the Phantom Leader's face.
It's a shame to hear that. Look at all I've done for you. Why is it that you think you were able to bypass my agents so easily? Certainly not because they were sloppy.
He then took a step forward.
Like it or not, you don't have a choice. After all, it would be a pity for this young woman to get hurt.
He said, as he took a lock of my hair and curled it randomly in his finger. I shivered at the implication, but I retained my strong guard. John's hands shook slightly as he aimed his gun at his father. Despite my nervousness, I remained calm as John's eyes glanced at us in a calculating manner, as if he was devising a plan.
My loyalty lies with the Seekers.
My guardian replied fiercely. It was the Phantom Leader's turn to raise an eyebrow.
Is that so?
He then turned to face John's clone.
Shadow. Kill them,
He ordered.
With pleasure, Daddy-o.
Came the response. However, what happened next didn't go according to the leader's plan. The clone aimed the shotgun at his creator's abdomen and fired. The man was thrown backwards from the force of the blow and left behind a thick streak of blood. Shadow calmly walked over to the dying man and smiled smugly at him.
Give my regards to Hell,
He said, before he aimed the shotgun at his master's head and fired, which killed him instantly. A mixture of emotions swirled within me. The murderer of my family, and of so many other innocent people, was dead at last. I felt satisfaction at the monster's death, yet there were bigger problems as long as Shadow remained alive. Said person huffed.
Never liked that self-concerned bastard.
His face then beamed as he smiled widely.
I feel like I just accomplished an important goal. After all, isn't it every child's dream to want their parents dead?
I looked at Shadow and narrowed my eyes at him. It sure as hell wasn't mine, I replied.
As usual, Agent Moore, you are an exception,
Was his only response. I glared at Shadow, but immediately straightened my posture as he walked over to me and placed his shotgun to my spine.
Here's what's going to happen. I'm taking Agent Moore with me. If any of you does anything stupid, I'll blow this place sky high.
To emphasize his point, the Phantom took out his detonator and popped open the lid. He held his thumb over the button. The Seekers immediately tensed at the notion, but John retained his ground. Shadow cocked his head at John's reaction.
You've got some balls,
he remarked. John didn't reply. Instead, he stared at me intensely, as if he was trying to relay a message to me. I looked back at him and nodded in understanding. I gathered my inner strength and headbutted Shadow hard, which caught him off guard. Despite my own dizziness, I managed to shove Shadow back, which gave John the perfect opportunity. He lined his gun to the still figure and fired well-aimed shots at both of his legs, while two other secret agents shot the guards behind me. They fell down wordlessly, while Shadow screamed in pain.
Yeah!
and pressed his hands onto both wounds. I felt relief, but the feeling was short-lived, as the remaining agent grabbed the detonator.
To hell with this!
He yelled as he pushed the button. Immediately, the area around us exploded all around, and I fell from the force. The secret agents all shouted at one another to get out of the way. I ignored the danger all around me as I tried to reach John. I saw that John also struggled to get to me, but unfortunately, he fell down as a large boulder crashed into some materials and knocked him down from behind. He tried to move, but he was pinned down. He looked at me in desperation.
Rachel!
He cried out. I sensed that moment was probably the end. So I stared back at him in the eyes and finally said what I've been meaning to say for a while. I love you. John's eyes widened as he stared at me. His eyes portrayed the pain he felt, as well as the mutual feeling for me. For a moment, the life that I could have had with John glanced before my eyes, and a tear managed to escape. The building shook violently, and once I looked up, everything became dark.